So I'm gonna talk to you about a little bit about the psychology of personality and strengths. Then we're going to have a bit of a hands-on play with this fab tool called StrongSuits, which is going to help you find out your strengths. When we get to that bit, I'll be doing it in Miro, but you don't have to. I'll share my screen. You don't have to join the Miro if you don't want to, but it's an opportunity to have a little play if you can do that. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a bit about strengths and what motivated me to write this talk, which I've actually been doing for a couple of years. And I kind of believe that we spend way too much time and energy um, trying to fix ourselves and striving for success. And this leads us to feel kind of pretty dissatisfied and maybe a bit unmotivated. And I think we have quite unrealistic expectations of ourselves and each other. And so if we took time to understand, accept ourselves, and kind of embrace our differences, then we might feel better about ourselves. So why are we so dissatisfied? So this is just referring to how we're constantly bombarded with social media and perfection. So, when I was growing up, the bombardment about perfection was reading some article from Jane Fonda about how my legs had to be 18 inches at the thigh and 12 inches at the knee or whatever, which was hard enough. But nowadays it's even your breakfast, it's like quinoa with goji berries and pearl barley or whatever. There's competition about absolutely everything. um, and that can make you kind of feel a bit inadequate. And then the world around us is even more individualistic and competitive than it's ever been. Um, how many likes and followers you have, um, how many um, how many people read your blogs, and this thing about personal brand. I don't think this helps. Um, and so we can easily convince ourselves that we're inadequate and then we need something more to be happy. And I see this particularly in young people when I'm coaching. They're all constantly working on themselves in a way that was never true when I was young. They're only 23 and they're working on themselves and their mindfulness and their meditation and their progression. And, it's kind of quite overwhelming. Let me just move that over there. So this also kind of affects us in that we kind of compare ourselves to each other. So we model ourselves on other people, our idols, people on the telly, and we want to be good at everything. And I don't think this is helped by this kind of attitude of, you can do anything if you put your mind to it, that we've sort of grown up. I mean, I don't think I could, maybe I could get on the X Factor, right? But I don't think I'm ever going to be a world-class basketball player. And yet we sort of, because I'm 4'6", well, 5 foot. I guess you needed to see me to get that right. But we compare ourselves to each other. And we don't just do this, within our peers and with our own environments. It happens at work. So I don't know if anybody of you ever been rated or ranked as part of a yearly review. Give me a hands up. Yeah. So toxic, in my opinion. So the way that tends to happen is you have this budget which you're able to allocate out in bonuses, and that is spread across a normal distribution curve. And that's based on your rating that you get. A 1 is really, really bad, and then a 2, and 3 is good, and you should be really happy with a good. And 68.26 of 26% of people get a good, which is a 3. And this is just setting ourselves up to have almost everybody in the organization miserable. because you get this tiny percentage of people. And I remember, leading a big team, having my boss come to me and say, Jenny, you've got too many fours and fives. You need a couple of ones. You need more threes. And I'm kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, what sort of motivation is that to have a happy, flourishing team that you're checking in with all the time? So I think this kind of punishes high performing teams. It's designed to help us feel unappreciated and demotivated. And where I'm kind of going with this is that this is often sitting around a set of core competencies as well. We want to be perfect, nice and well rounded. So Jenny, you're really good at communication. Jenny, you're really good at team leadership, but you're really rubbish at negotiation. So I'm going to score you down on that. So go do a course in that. We spend all this energy trying to fix ourselves. And then another problem is that we all have our own mental filters and biases. So this leads us to see the world very differently from each other. So what do you see in the chat? Quick, what do you see? What do you see? What have we got? Anybody see anything in the chat? Yeah, duck, rabbit, and duck. So this is just a really quick thing that demonstrates we perceive the world differently. And we often impose our own values and expectations onto other people. So we tend to like and want to work with people who are similar to us. Most of the coaching I do in teams comes down to misunderstandings and miscommunications that we have as we're trying to navigate the complexities of the work environment. And often it's because other people are quite different to us and they're seeing us, we're seeing each other in very different ways. So we're surrounded by images of perfect, we're being compared to each other, we're being reviewed and developed to be good at everything. What does perfect look like? I'm just going to introduce you to Perfect Pete. Okay, so here's our perfect agile team member, our homogenous, perfect agile team member. He's a beautiful white man with white shiny teeth and a blow dry, so he's rather lovely. He's also a full stack developer, of course, can code in multiple languages. He can do automated testing, TDD. He's a great developer, can do that really deep, kind of deep, immersive, innovative development, but he's also a great communicator and a team player. He can work at the detail level and the big picture level. He tweets, he's got a following, he's got a side project, his own blog, he's a vegan, volunteers in his spare time, environmentally conscious, did a triathlon last week. Super personality, gets on with everybody, confident but not too confident, just a tiny bit of vulnerability. Why haven't we all evolved to be Perfect Pete? You'd have thought, wouldn't you, if there's so much, if that's what we're looking for on our teams, and the natural selection, you'd have thought that we'd have all evolved to be Pete, wouldn't you? So here's where I'm going to take you through a whistle-stop tour of personality psychology, which I'm going to go through at lightning speed, but I didn't want to leave it out. So I did psychology at university. The first sort of folks looking at personality were the ancient Greek philosophers. So right back then, personality was about the four humours, which was like yellow bile. If you were poorly, meant you were angry. Ooh, a sluggish personality was black bile. Not very nice stuff. But this is when personality was very much about philosophy, Then phrenology came along. So this is when there started to be a bit of an understanding that actually personality is about the brain, and personality could have something to do with anatomy. And so neuroanatomists in the 18th century started to hypothesize this relationship between the physical properties of the brain and personality. And this case of Phineas Cage, which is shown on the slide here, this man had a really bad accident which affected his brain, and his personality changed. So he went from being having a really nice demeanor to being profane and impatient. So that was where, the first sort of thoughts about the brain being linked to personality. And then we've got all of the psychoanalysis of Freud and the id, the ego, the superego, and Carl Jung's psychological types of intuition, sensation, feeling, thinking. This is what kind of Myers-Briggs came from, which is actually really dispelled in terms of psychological research now. It's not founded on science. It's also pigeonholes people into boxes, and the folks that set it up were kind of guru coachy type people rather than scientists. So the serious kind of psychological stuff around personality, you might have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is about your physical needs and things that govern your well-being. So you all know this aspect. At the bottom you've got the safety needs, and then love and belonging and esteem, and right at the top is about recognizing your potential. And then this is where all of the personality science becomes much more stable. So in the 1940s, psychologist Hans Eysenck hypothesized that there were kind of three key personality traits: neuroticism, introversion, and psychosis, and that you could be kind of high or low in all of those three. And there's basically loads and loads of scientific empirical research around factor analysis and looking at these independent aspects of personality and whether they relate to each other. And that turned into this thing called the Big Five, which is these things, the Big Five. Anybody heard of the Big Five? I'd be interested to see in the chat if you've heard of the Big Five. So these are all yay, some hands raised. So these are all considered to be independent from each other. This science is still pretty solid, widely accepted in psychology, and each of us has scales of all of these things. So openness is not about revealing your thoughts and inner feelings. It's more about curiosity. So being very curious versus being very cautious. So extremely creative artists tend to be very, very high in openness. Conscientiousness versus carelessness. Extroversion versus introversion, which we've understood for a long time. Agreeableness versus being detached or challenging, and neuroticism versus being secure and confident. So these are kind of the big five pillars of personality, and they spell out ocean. We all have varieties of this on the different scales of these personalities. And it's not just how we express ourselves. You can reflect this. We can see this in our brains, and you can see at when we look at the size of the brain and the metabolic activity of the structures, you can see that it's very likely the personality traits are down to differences in neural structure across different brain regions, which is very interesting. So, okay, given that, how much of our personality do you think is down to nature versus nurture? So if you could put a ratio, I'm going to give you a chance in the chat. How much of our personality do you think is down to nature or nurture? Gold, yes, it is a tough one. And interestingly, it's 50-50. And recent research is showing that it even more so tending towards the genetics. So we really are, I mean, of course, this is a propensity, right? So our environment, the genetics creates a propensity for certain things, and our environment, of course, shapes us massively. But this is represented, oh, sorry, you can actually see, I went a slide too far ahead. You can actually see in our DNA, not this particular one, but you can see strands of DNA that relate to agreeableness. And you can observe in the animal kingdom, you know, extrovert chimpanzees. Here's one here, an extrovert chimpanzee. This is the most neurotic octopus I could find. But you can have neurotic octopuses. So why do we think we have this variation? Why does this exist? Here's a picture of a guppy fish. And guppy fish have been observed to have different personalities and behave differently around predators. So one experiment, they put guppy fish in a tank with a divide, and behind the Perpex divider was its predator, which is one of these, which is a pumpkin seed fish. And they assigned the guppy fish into different groups of wariness, high wariness, medium wariness, low wariness. And then they carried out this experiment, took the Perspex slide out. Which guppy fish do you think got eaten the first? The wary guppy fish or the brave guppy fish? The brave guppy fish got eaten first because they went and kind of get too close to the pumpkin seed fish and got eaten. So you'd think then brave would not be a good quality for guppy fish to have around pumpkin fish. But you do still get wary ones and brave ones and middling ones. And that's because when the channels are too narrow upstream for the pumpkin seed fish to get to, the guppy fish do better when they're more extrovert. And so the answer is it depends, right? So it depends on the environment. There's also an example of a big study on grape tits, and most of the time, extroverted grape tits do better because they hop more frequently, they take more hops away from the nest, and they get more food. But during years where food is plentiful, the female grape tits prefer the more humble ones, and they mate more easily. So what does this all mean? Genetic variation in personality helps preserve our species. So how well we thrive depends on the environment and the situation. And so this is all leading up to, you know, I really believe that we're all perfectly formed as we are. Now, strengths isn't quite the same as personality because strengths is about things you can develop. So strengths, you can develop them, whereas personality traits are kind of quite stable. But if we can find our environment, our niche, where our strengths shine and our challenges are minimized, then, you know, we're gonna do better. And the whole movement of positive psychology from the kind of late 1990s shows that not only, you know, are we more able to develop in the direction of our strengths, but they're absolutely essential to our individual identity and our life satisfaction and well-being. But 2/3 of us don't even know what they are. I did a meetup group recently, and I asked the audience, "Do you know what your strengths are?" And I got a lot of nods. "Do you know what your weaknesses are?" And everybody nodded. So at the Gallup organization, they've done loads of research on this, and Each person's talents are enduring and unique, and each person's greatest room for growth is in their area of their greatest strengths. So, for example, if we go back to that example I gave you about me being rubbish at negotiation, I'm a highly trusting person and I want everybody to like me. And that's a really enormous strength most of the time. But if I'm reviewing a contract and I'm negotiating with somebody, I'm also a big picture thinker. I'm really likely to, skip through the document because I'm bored, miss loads of important information, and then say in the negotiation, well, I'm sure it's all fine. You seem nice. Yeah, I'm never going to get good at that. I'm never going to get good at it. So you can go train me in negotiation, or I can find somebody who loves picking that apart and loves the challenge of the negotiation. So our greatest opportunity for awesomeness is to do more of what we already enjoy and what we're already good at. And this can help us be happy. And not just this, when we understand other people's strengths, it can help us put ourselves in their mindset and recognize that actually what's happening is to do with their strengths and how they see the world. So we're going to look at in a minute, I'm just going to stop this in a moment, a tool that helps us do that. But I'll just quickly, as I stop sharing that, quick opportunity for any questions on that before we go into the Miro board. Okay, let's dive right in. Unless there was one there. Okay. So let's dive into the Miro board. I'm going to share my screen, and you should see a big Miro board. And I will also share the link into the chat, which is there. And I'll tell you a little bit about what's in here. Okay, so here's the whole canvas. I'm gonna, in a moment, bring you all to me. Just if you don't already know, this button here, show collaborators cursors, will hide or show any other people. So I'll just give you a moment to come and join the board. I will zoom in and I'll bring you to where I am on the board. Okay, so I'll bring you to me. So this section then of the talk, we're going to look at this tool called StrongSuits, which I've become a real fan of the last few months because I've used it with loads of teams and found it extremely useful and accessible in helping discover team strengths. And what StrongSuits is, it's basically a pack of cards. We're obviously doing it online, but it's a pack of cards that we've got physical packs as well. And within each pack, there are 4 suits. Each of those suits represent different communication styles. So the diamonds is about standards, being reliable, objective, thorough. The spades is about drive, being determined, driven, assertive. The heart is about passion, being energetic, enthusiastic, persuasive. And the club is about relationships. And these have been designed with lots of research. You can find out on the website a bit more about the research that's gone into this, but it draws on Seligman's work and other other factors of limiting thoughts and communication styles that are all part of positive psychology. You see, all of these cards are strengths, so they're all strengths. This is what I love about it. So if we choose one, plain speaking is a strength. The articulation of that strength is written at the top of the card. So I say what I mean and I mean what I say. If we turn it around, our overplayed strength is this. Some people see me as blunt and insensitive. So hopefully you can see that, that blunt and insensitive is really just a shadow side of the strength. So they're all strengths. And we're going to play a really quick game, which is going to help you identify yours. So let me show you what we're going to do, and I'll give you an example here. If you can see, make sure you bring you all to me again. Here I've created a whole load of different card tables, and there's two parts. There's the left-hand side, which is where you're going to play the game, and the right-hand side, which is where you're going to lay out your cards. So first of all, I'm going to ask you to claim an area on the board to work on by grabbing a post-it note. If you're going to play along, grabbing a post-it note and writing your name in there. Okay, so just if you're going to play along, claim a board. I think we've got plenty. So claim that, and then I'm going to show you how to play this game. Now there's loads of StrongSuits games which help you understand your strengths and understand team strengths and shadow suits, what you're like at your best, what you're like at your worst, and how the whole team comes together. This one is about thinking about you at your best, and it's called your strong suit. Okay, so just give this a moment to load. Ooh. Right, that's better. Okay, so if you're still, let me bring you to me again. What you can see here on each of the card tables is in the center is all of the suits. So you can see behind here there's ace, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, this game is really simple. What you're going to do is look at the top cards and make a decision which one of these sounds most like me when I'm at my best. Okay, so I'm going to choose an ace, a 2, a 3, a 4, so that I end up with 13 cards. So for each time I'm making a choice between the 4 that I see. So let me show you before I let you off to have a go. So out of these, I'm going to choose vision. And you can see the discard is at the pile at the top and the keep is at the bottom. So I'm going to keep vision, and then I'm going to discard all the other aces. And now I'm left with 2s. Yeah. And so what I'm going to do now is check out the 2s and think, okay, I've done this a few times, so I'm quick, right? So I am easygoing out of those. And then I'm going to discard the 2s. And I'm going to go all the way until I've gone all the way down to the kings, and I should have 13 cards. And when I've done with that, I'm going to lay out the ones I've kept over to the right. Okay, your boards won't move because they're locked down against whichever suit they are. So that one I would put down against spades. Does that make sense? I'm going to give you about 12 minutes to do this. I'm going to put the timer on in Miro. I'm just going to let you do this in silence. I will continue with mine. I'll continue screen sharing in case you're watching without access to Miro. And then when the timer ends, Tom, stop it, put it down. When the timer ends, we'll be able to regroup, and Ryan's going to take your questions and talk about how this can apply to you and your agile teams. Okay, we are back. Never fear if you didn't get time to finish. We'll share some links at the end where you can play some of these games online on the StrongSuits website. Hopefully, it just gave you a bit of time to think about what you're like and what you're good at. And as I mentioned, there's all sorts of different games that you can play with these cards. One of the things that you can do, and we're going to have a go at this, it might be slightly optimistic, but let's have a go anyway. Why not? You can see that what I've got here is a big grid. And one of the things that you can do after you play this game, which is looking at, your typical communication styles, is see on a team how you all differ from each other. Okay, so we're going to try and plot you on this graph. Just spend a couple of minutes, see if we can do it. So for example, let me start off. You might need to take a note. Okay, so I have got, if I zoom in to me, I have got 1 diamond, 4 hearts, 5 spades, and 3 clubs. And I did share on the board over here, which you can take a look at. I'll leave you access to this board. I'll just make it read only afterwards. You can read a bit about your communication styles and preferences down here. There's the PDF which tells you about each one. In order to plot ourselves on this graph, what we would do is subtract hearts from diamonds and subtract spades from clubs in order to figure out where you are. So of course there's 13 cards. If you were right in the center, you'd have 3 1/4 of each, right? Which isn't possible. So I'm going to take my little post-it note, make it a bit smaller, so it fits in one of those squares, and I'm going to say, okay, I've got three more hearts than diamonds. So if I'm in the middle on the hearts versus diamonds axis, I'm going to be 3 towards hearts. And in terms of the other axis, I've got 2 more spades than I have clubs. So I'm going to be 2 in the direction of spades compared to clubs. Hopefully that makes sense. So I challenge you, this is a stretch goal. See if you can plot yourself on the graph.
Could you just explain that again, Jenny? Sorry if I'm in a pain. I didn't quite get it.
It's quite hard to explain, actually. So this graph shows axis of clubs and spades and hearts and diamonds. Hopefully you can see that. Let me lock that. Yeah. So in order to figure out where you are on this, you start by taking the black suits one away from the other. So if you've got 2 more spades than you have clubs, you'll be 2 boxes to the right on the axis, which is the horizontal axis. And then
what happens if you haven't got anything to take away? So I've got 5 spades and 0 clubs.
So then it's 5 in the direction of spades. So you're taking 0 away from 5. Yeah?
Okay.
You're all the way over here. And then what do you have on the others?
I have 2 on the diamonds and 6 on the hearts.
So you've got 4 more hearts than you have diamonds. So you're going to be down here where my cursor is.
Okay.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Let me copy this one because I've lost mine.
And so when you do this with a team, you can see, oh, crikey, that person's miles away from me. That explains a few things. And you can start to figure out and really start to explore different ways of understanding each other a little bit better. So that was a really, really, really quick, speedy intro into one way of discovering your strengths. There's lots of tools out there, but I particularly like this because it's so easy. If you've got a pack of cards, you can just whip them out and start to play without any permission or without any psychoactive test or anything like that, which is really, really accessible and promotes these fantastic conversations. I'm going to hand over to Ryan now to talk to you a bit more about this stuff and to take any questions. Should I keep my screen share or I'll keep my
No, it's fine. I think everyone's hopefully got the mirror board. Thanks, Jenny.
Yep, okay, so let me stop sharing. Stop share.
Brilliant. Cool. Yeah, maybe we could take a few questions first. Anyone got any questions or comments?
I got one. Remind me, what does the little purple square in the middle mean? Does that mean like they're awesome and you want loads of people in there?
So you mean on the diagram on the graph, there's a purple square right in the middle?
Yeah.
Yeah. You look like you were about to answer that, Jenny. Did you want to?
No, I was just like, no, there's no right answer. So I was just like, I was really glad you asked that because I forgot to say. So no, go on, I'll let you answer, Ryan.
Yeah, it's just a statistical thing that there's less statistical significance if you end up in the middle. But yeah, there's no right, there's no better, there's no wrong. It's just as much information for you if you end up in the middle as if you end up on some extreme.
Yeah.
I think looking at this, if we need to go and negotiate with some people, I think we need to send in Vlad to go and win some relationships.
Have you got your team on the map, have you?
No, just Vlad from this meetup group.
Yeah, so that's where the beauty really comes, is when you start to see where your colleagues end up. So it's really a team map, team strengths map. And then you can, as Helen said, come in with, well, where are our respective strengths? Where can we utilize them the most, as you've said? If you need to do some people negotiation, then use the best of the strengths that you have in your team.
It's quite interesting if you zoom out, sort of look across the board, without looking at the details, like the distribution of cards. Vlad is definitely an outlier in terms of kind of weighting towards one particular suit. I also got one person, I think, who misunderstood the instructions, judging by the number of cards on the board. But yeah, it's a lot of people. It's sort of quite an interesting spread.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, when you might not always know that about yourself. So I made a switch in my career from working quite really closely with technical teams to doing more people focused stuff. And it was on the realization that, whilst I had those other skills, the stuff that really motivated me like that. So once you know that, you can go and find more of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So yeah, maybe I'll just pick up on what Jenny has very eloquently already shared and just riff on that a little bit. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. You can just give me a thumbs up.
Yep.
So yeah, so these are some of the big ideas behind StrongSuits, and Jenny's talked at length on strengths, although I'm sure she could talk to you for another hour quite easily. But really, people perform best when they play to their strengths. All the work that Jenny shared and Gallup and Martin Seligman have published a lot on that. Diversity, like Jenny was saying, if you have one fish that is more brave and another fish is more wary, then the diversity is very useful in a team. So if you're approaching the other, I can't remember what the big scary fish was, but if you're approaching that big scary fish, then you probably want to listen to the more wary fish as well. Yeah, but every strength at some point can become overplayed. So you start to understand that the more wary fish is perhaps sometimes being over wary, and understanding that diversity in the team benefits the team as a whole. People interact and communicate in different ways. So the work of William Moulton Marston, which led to the DISC system, and Jenny talked about the ocean. The work of Linda Berens, who particularly looked at interaction styles. Those are all layered onto the cards as well. And then our limitations hold the keys to our strengths. So as you saw, when you turn the card upside down, you can see the limiting part of that strength. But on the other hand, if you're looking at your limitations, that can also lead you back to your strengths. And the work of Daniel Ofman helps us to see that. Of course, often we see the limitations in other people. But if we just take that limitation one step backwards, like someone who has the strength of drive, when they're overplaying that strength, they might become pushy. They might even bulldoze people at times. But if we take a step, just one little step back from that, we can see that actually there's a strength behind that limitation, which is the strength of drive, which sometimes might become overplayed. Some people are just arseholes, and yeah, we get that too. But most of the time, most people, they're overplaying a strength. And if we can see that, we can actually probably deal with 80, 90% of the cases. A couple of other things. Does anyone have in their results two cards that have the same color and the same number? Just give me a sign or wave your hand. Pop it in the chat. Anyone have two cards in your 13 that have the same color and the same number? Okay, well, those would be opposite strengths. And of course, you can have them in the same individual, but you can often have them in different individuals. And again, back to the value of diversity in a team, what would it be like if someone was plain speaking and someone else was diplomatic? Like Helen gave the example of, in certain situations, it might be better to have one team member to do the negotiating part, for example. But also where people tend to, where the friction comes and people rub themselves up the wrong way, rub each other up the wrong way, I should say, is often because of opposite strengths. So if we can identify those opposite strengths and ask the question, what's the value of having this strength in the team, and what's the value of having this strength in the team? And then we might also see where those strengths might become overplayed. But often we prefer to work with people who are like us, because then, you know, we feel like we're more like a tribe, we're more similar to us. But actually what you want to do probably a bit more of, as Dave Snowden says, is maximize the dissonance to create a disturbance. You actually probably want to have more diversity rather than consensus, groupthink, everyone thinking the same, everyone acting the same, because then you don't really see the shadows in your team. You don't see the benefit of having that diversity and what they can actually bring to the team. So what we might say is that, if I can get my cursor working, is that instead of saying that the opposite of a strength is a weakness, actually the opposite of a strength is another strength. If I was living next to a nuclear power factory, I'd probably want the safety manager of that nuclear power factory to have the strength of caution rather than the strength of optimism. And optimism and caution are opposite cards on the in the pack. So really, it's down a lot to perspective, as Jenny has pointed out. It's what's most appropriate in this environment. We all have different perspectives, but what would be the most useful perspective given the environment that we're in? So yeah, we can map this on a strength map, and then we can also turn the cards around, play the same game, but looking at us at our worst. And then we can see where we actually go when we're at our worst. For example, when we're under stress, or when we've got a deadline to meet. We can ask any question we want and play the game and see what happens when we're at our worst or under certain conditions. Yeah, and then I mentioned the work of Daniel Ofman. He's really helped us to map what happens when you have a strength. You overplay that strength. So you have a strength of planning, you overplay it. People who plan too much, or they fixated on planning, could become too rigid. The antidote of that is the opposite of planning, which is to have more instinct, to be more adaptable, to work more on hunches that might just arise spontaneously. But of course, if we overplay that, then we become impulsive. And so the antidote to that is to have more planning. So we can also see not only that we can have opposite strengths in the team that are useful, but it can also be a self-development tool where we can see that, you know, we could flex ourselves as well. Of course, our natural strength, as Jenny has said, are our natural strengths. And you want to use those as best as you can and as much as you can, because that's what energizes you. You won't get burned out when you're playing to your natural strengths. But also, you know, sometimes good to have a little bit of range, personal agility and all that stuff. Yeah, Jane says my overplay of kindness is people pleasing and putting others first. Exactly. So any strength at some point can become overplayed. So yeah, as we see, our limitations hold the keys to our strengths. So if we start with the limitation, we say, well, that usually what we do is we limit other people. We say, oh, that person's really rigid. But actually, if we take one step back, we actually see that they have the strength of planning. And the person who has the strength of planning says the person who has the strength of instinct is impulsive. Oh, that person's always impulsive. They never stick to the plan. It's changing the plan all the time. Okay, hold on a second. Just take one step back, and you actually see that maybe they have the strength of instinct, which could also be useful to us at times, depending on the context. So yeah, ultimately, really, we can say nobody is as capable as everybody. That's really where the value comes in, because we're talking about building stronger teams here, and stronger teams, more diverse teams, where each person is playing to their strengths, use the maximum of everyone's strengths in the team, recognize our shadows, recognize where the opposites might be happening, where the overplayed strengths are happening as well, but ultimately playing to our strengths. And that comes really good in feedback, because feedback, instead of saying you're good at that and you suck at that, or, you know, competency matrices, oh, you're a 3 out of 5, you need to get to a 4 out of 5 to get your bonus and your promotion. Instead, we can say, this is a strength that I recognize in you, and it might be even better if you also showed this strength from my perspective. So at least I'm saying, you know, from my perspective, I recognize the strength in you, and it would be awesome for me and perhaps for the team if you also showed this strength on top. It's a much more appreciative inquiry way, a much more positive way of giving feedback to people. So really, yeah, a lot of it is down to psychological safety. It's much safer to give people feedback in the form of a strength and build that up to the point where you could then perhaps give and it would be even better if strength as well, rather than going straight for the improvement piece. This is wrong. This, you know, you need to improve at that, etc. And if you can really do that, acknowledge that people who are who they are, and we playing to each other's strengths, that's a more psychologically safe environment to work in.